Welcome to Thursfields Talk Legal, a vidcast series from one of the leading law firms in the Midlands. I'm Steve Dyson, a journalist who's talking to a range of solicitors at Thursfields on legal topics of wide interest to the public or businesses. Today's episode is focused on providing a guide to buying, selling or leasing commercial premises. And I'm going to talk to Stewart Coles. He's an Associate Director in the Commercial Property Department at Thursfields Solicitors. Hello to you, Stewart.
Hi, Steve, and thanks for having me on today.
No problems at all, Stewart. We're here to talk about buying, selling or leasing commercial premises, Stewart. But before we get into the detail of those different activities, let's consider commercial properties themselves. What makes them different from buying, selling or renting domestic properties?
Well, I suppose at a very sort of basic level, the conveyancing process follows a lot of similar stages as if you're buying a house. The solicitor will carry out searches, raise inquiries with the seller's solicitor, check the title deeds, so that the fundamentals are the same. But there's such a wide range of additional issues and considerations that come into play with commercial property. I mean, if you just take the nature of the property can be so varied. You can be dealing with a high street shop, an office in a large office block, a unit on an industrial estate, maybe like a large factory site. There can be a sort of real range of types of properties which all come with different considerations and different issues. That you often find that the title deeds are more complicated with commercial properties, especially if you're dealing with a larger site. It could be various parcels of land sort of pieced together, different titles put together to make the site. There can be issues of easements and access ways and rights of way to access the property. There can be far more complicated and onerous restrictive covenants in the title deeds, maybe restricting what you can do with the property. So there's a lot of extra considerations that you might not get so often or into such detail with a residential property. And I find that what you need to do with commercial property is really sort of tailor the conveyancing process depending on the client's intended use of the property and their business. I find it really important to get to know the client's business, get to understand their business and what they want to do with that property, because everyone's business will be slightly different and everyone's use of the property will be slightly different. And we need to understand that so you can make sure that this property will be suitable and appropriate for that client. So it needs to be a lot more bespoke than residential conveyancing sometimes. And also, there's a lot of additional regulatory considerations with commercial properties. So in addition to sort of planning issues and building regulations, which you do get with residential properties as well, but can be more complex with commercial, you've got a vast array of other legislation to make sure that it complies with. You have fire safety regulations, asbestos regulations. Environmental issues can be much more problematic with commercial properties. So the list of issues and the list of things that sort of make commercial property so can be so complicated. It's too extensive to really get into detail now. But I think clients really just need to appreciate and be aware that a purchase of a commercial property can be a lot more complex than buying a house.
All understood, Stewart. What, therefore, are some of the key things I would need to think about if I was seeking to buy a commercial property?
Well, I generally find that a buyer's sort of the key considerations for a buyer are really, they want to get done quickly and they want to know what's going to cost them money. So for me, one of the best pieces of advice is to try and address as many things as possible at as early a stage as possible in the process. So things like, obviously funding is going to be a key one. Are they going to be requiring a mortgage to fund the purchase? If so, it's important for clients to be aware that the process for arranging a commercial mortgage can take a lot longer and be a lot more involved than a mortgage for buying a house. There could be a lot more additional security that the bank might be looking to take, debentures, personal guarantees. There's a lot more to it, and it can take a long time. Even more so over the last 12 months, banks are sort of moving a lot slower than they were previously. If you're buying a property in a pension scheme, again, there's a lot of procedural steps and regulatory steps to go through just to get the pension scheme set up and ready to buy the property. So a lot of things need to be done before the legal work can really start. some things that clients might not be aware of that we'll need from them. We have to do what's called source of funds checks, and it's just sort of useful for clients to be aware of that we have to do this, so they're not sort of offended or surprised if the solicitor's asking them questions about where their money's come from. It's something that we have to ask these questions, and sometimes even go further and get documentary evidence from the client as to where that money's come from. So it's useful if the client realises that and has the paperwork and has the information ready for us. I'd say another key consideration is to get your accountants involved at as early a stage as possible. Things like, they can address things like the VAT. If you can find out, is the property going to be subject to VAT? Is VAT going to be payable on the purchase price? If so, liaise with your accountant to make sure that you can fund that you can recover the VAT. Are there going to be ways that we can structure the deal as a transfer of a going concern, a TOGC, to avoid paying the VAT? And again, the more that we can address those things at the beginning, the better. Capital allowances is another issue that accountants need to be getting involved with at an early stage. So again, that's something where there can be quite substantial tax savings for a client who buys a property, but only if it's addressed during the conveyancing process. But that needs input from the accountant right at the start. Getting a survey done early is always obviously important from a practical point of view, and then make sure that you let the solicitor know of any issues that have been revealed by that survey. If you're buying a new build property, what warranties or guarantees are you going to be getting? If you can, again, agree these things at the heads of term stage, that makes the whole conveyancing process a lot easier. Now, a lot of these things, obviously, there's a lot there that you wouldn't expect your average purchaser of a property to know, to ask, or be aware of, or think about. That's where, if you get your lawyer involved early, if you come to me when you're thinking about buying property, maybe you've found something, you're agreeing the terms, and I'll be able to guide you on the various things that you need to be getting arranged and getting put in place at an early, and it just helps the process along the way.
That's great advice for a buyer, Stewart. Let's consider the other side of the coin now. We're selling a commercial property. What would I need to make sure I've got ready, and what can I do to help the sale proceed in a smoother way?
Again, I'd say it's getting, as you say, as much in place as possible at an early stage, rather than sort of waiting for the buyer to ask the question further down the line and find you haven't got certain reports in place. So getting things like your energy performance certificate, asbestos surveys, fire risk assessments, getting all that paperwork ready. And if you haven't got an asbestos survey, chances are you're going to have to get it done. So make the arrangements early. Electrical and gas certificates. If you're on a property where there's a service charge payable, get the service charge paperwork ready, because that's something that the buyer's going to want to see. Again, VAT is an important one. Check with your accountant whether the property is subject to VAT and whether you're going to have to charge VAT on the sale price. And if it's something that you don't know straight away, and we have to contact the HMRC's option to tax department, you need to be aware that that's taking several weeks, if not a couple of, possibly a few months, to get a response from them. So, again, if you're only asking that question later down the line, it could delay the whole transaction. So, yeah, it's getting your professional advisors in line early, getting advice from them early, and getting your paperwork ready, and it'll help the whole process move smoothly.
Those are certainly important points to consider when you're selling a commercial property. How about, Stuart, if the transaction is less permanent and you're seeking to lease a commercial property? What top tips do you have there for both the landlord and the potential tenant?
Well, yes, I mean, taking a lease of a property, it's a very wide subject. I could speak for, or we could do a whole session on that, advising both landlords and tenants on various things to look out for. So if I just was to pick out 2 or 3 key sort of top tips for a tenant taking a lease of a commercial property, again, I always look at what's going to potentially cost the client money. Obviously, they'll know what the rent's going to be, but what else is going to potentially cost them money? And the big one is always the condition of the property and the repairing obligations in the lease. So the key thing is, and the ideal advice is to get a survey carried out, get a surveyor on board. They can advise you on the condition of the property and identify any problems, any repairs that you might need to get sorted out before you take over the property. We might get the landlord to sort out before you take over the property. They can help with preparing what's called a schedule of condition, a set of photographs, a record of the condition of the property, so that if that's incorporated properly into the lease, you can't be made responsible for putting the property into any better condition than it was in when you first took that over. So getting that survey or looking at the condition issues is very important for those two reasons. One, it's protecting you by making sure you won't be responsible for putting right pre-existing defects, and it's identifying things that you want to get the landlord to put right potentially before you take over the property, or maybe you'll have to put right, but maybe you want to get the landlord to pay for it or to give you a rent-free period to allow for it. So because the condition of the property and the repair requirements can be the biggest cost that a tenant ends up having. So it's important to get that right at the start. Other things that could cost you money would be things like the service charge. If you're on an estate or a shopping centre where you're contributing towards costs of maintaining common areas and other services the landlord might provide, then normally that service charge probably will fluctuate from year to year. It won't be a fixed figure. And as part of the conveyancing, the legal process, we'll be finding out about that. We'll be reporting to you on it, we're finding out what services are provided, what costs are covered, and how much it's likely to be. But ideally, if you can agree some sort of either fixed figure or a cap, a limit on what you might have to pay under that service charge, then at least then you're not potentially writing a blank check, and you know that your costs are at least capped, so it won't go, but you won't suddenly be hit with a substantial bill at some point in the future. One other thing that I always suggest tenants can try and address early on, and can often do a lot of it themselves, is looking into the planning position. So just a phone call to the local authority can help you find out whether the property you have identified, what the permitted use is of the planning law, and whether your proposed use of the property is going to be okay under planning law. So what you don't want to find is that you get halfway through the process, you've found the property, you want to get in there quickly, you get halfway through the process, and then you find you've got to actually apply for change of use consent, which can take up to 8 weeks to go through the planning department. And obviously that's going to end up causing a delay to the whole process. So again, the more of these things that you can address at an early stage, it can only help the process move smoothly and get you into that property quicker and protect you as much as possible. So those are my key tips for taking a lease of a commercial property.
Stewart, it's been illuminating to discuss buying, selling or leasing commercial premises with you. If people listening want more detailed advice, how can they contact you at Thursfields?
My email address is scoles, so it's SCOLES, at thursfields.co.uk, and the best telephone number to come through to us on is 0345 207 3728.
Stewart Coles, an Associate Director in the Commercial Property Department at Thursfields Solicitors. Many thanks for joining us on Thursfields Talk Legal.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Hopefully what Stewart had to say about buying, selling or leasing commercial premises is something people will find useful. We'll be back soon to talk to more legal experts here at Thursfields and to explore other interesting aspects of the legal world. Thursfields Talk Legal. Thanks for listening.